How did you come across these particular 4 stories? How did you select these stories?
Yeah, we were starting in the year 2009, and we were looking for help. There's an historic institution in Berlin. They are making, two historians, they are making researches about how Jewish people could survive in Berlin during World War II. Before that, I didn't know that there were quite many more than I thought they would have been able to survive there in the clandestino, in the underground. And so we started to make the plan. These stories, they are so full of tension. Every day is full of risks. Every day can be the last. They have to pretend while they are running around. You cannot hide yourself for more than 2 years. This is nearly impossible. Only very, very few persons could do that. You have to hide yourself in between the other people, outside, somewhere. And therefore they were looking for places where many people had been around, like the Broadway in Berlin, the Kurfürstendamm, yeah, or so. And so we started to make these researches, and then we thought we want to bring 4 of these stories together, 2 men and 2 young women in those days. So we show that these 4 stories are representative for these 1,700, 1,600 who survived.
And when did you always know that you were going to make a hybrid film that was half documentary and half narrative?
Yeah, the first idea was to make a pure documentary about it, but then we very, very soon had the idea that it gets more emotional deepness, because you have to show at least something. You have to transport the feeling, what it means to, if you don't know where you get these, how to feed, where you have to sleep, who is the one who helps you by helping you, that you can, who opens the doors, yeah? Who helps. And so we had the plan to make a mixture out of it, and that was a problem as well, because that format is in cinema very unusual. Very unusual. And because of that, it was for a long time totally risky that it would work.
I've never seen it handled so elegantly before and woven together as a narrative. It never pulls you out one way or the other. It just is seamless and takes you through the story. It was truly remarkably done, just as a piece of filmmaking. So devastating, so beautiful. I'm sure the audience has lots of questions. They're right there. The question is, what role did the 4 actual people play? Did they look at the people you were choosing to play them? How involved were they?
No, the only person who was involved in the actress was the woman with the red hair, Mrs. Levy, the blonde girl in our movie. She's in a fantastic condition. She's now 93 years old, and she was meeting, before we started, she was meeting the young actress, and she directly thought, well, I'm a very beautiful young woman. And when we had been ready with the movie, and when it was when there was the first screening on the Hamburg Film Festival, I was sitting next to Mrs. Levy and my wife and co-screenwriter, author Alejandra. We were sitting there with Mrs. Levy, and then the young actress came, and then Mrs. Levy said, "Here I come." That was so amazing.
And did any of the other people in the film live to see the finished film?
Yeah, the other person who was there at the theatrical release in Germany, that was Eugen Friede. He becomes 92 this year. Chioma Schönhaus, the guy with the unbelievable story, being somebody who helps other people by making papers. To be able to have papers who could work when there is a control, that was the most important thing. during that time. That's what all these stories from people who survived told us, and had been written in books as well. But he died a few months before we started the fiction part of that project. So that was just because it took so long a time till we could start, because we had to find all these subsidies. And then there was, in the year 2012, 2013, there was the situation in Europe and in Germany as well. People from the TV stations, and they thought there had been so many movies about the Nazi episode these years and about this theme, that the audience does not like it anymore. That was for between 2010 and 2012-13. There was an attitude. And then we thought, no, we have to do that, because this is such an interesting story to tell. And even though that you think that people does not like to see that kind of stories anymore, that's not true, because the next generation and the next generation, they have to be involved in that as well, because history is something which can come back in a different way, but history is never something which had been and will not, that it will not be able, that it can come back in another form.
So, as we've seen now. All the way in back, almost in the background.
I mean, it's wonderful, wonderful movie. Can you tell us, will this be opening in New York, and how has it been received in Germany and other countries in Europe?
It was running pretty well in Germany. We are now almost nearly 100,000 people had been watching that, and it was started in Germany just with 54 copies. This is not a lot. This is just a small, not a very small, but a small number of copies of theatres who started that. And with 54 copies, theatres, we made now in almost 3 months, and it's still running, and the numbers of the people who are watching that movie, it's getting more now, yeah, because they bring it to other smaller cities as well, Germany. So the reactions and the number of spectators, that was for the distributor as well. That was it was a surprising moment, and it was running pretty well.
And is it going to open in New York? Do you know?
I don't know when, but I heard something about that they will open it directly after the end of the summer holidays, so at the end of summer.
And do you want to introduce just the special guests that we have here?
Yeah. Tonight there are the two sons of that beautiful, telling her own surviving story of Mrs. Arndt, Mrs. Gampel, what the name made it, and in the US. The two sons, that's Larry, he's from New York City. And he was in Berlin when we had the theatrical release with 550 persons being there. And then his brother from close to San Francisco, from Petaluma, where Mrs. Gampel lived her last 20 years. And Stanley Gampel is here as well.
Are there other questions? Right here? The question is, how did you personally get involved? How did you get interested in this story?
I made 2 years before I started together with my co-author Alejandra. I was making a pure documentary about a very dangerous place in Berlin. It was a kind of saloon from the Nazis, where they were making some spider stuff, microphones behind the carpets at the wall, and it was a dangerous place. It called Saloon Kitty, and I found out that in this place where Nazis were going out and in, and Italian people from the ambassador places, that in this place there was a Jewish woman being hidden as a service maid, as a housemaid. And she went, after she survived in that dangerous and safe place in one way, she went to New York, and she was telling a story in 1955 or 57 at the NBC show, That Was Your Life. It wasn't a story about her life, it was a story about a man who helped her to be able to work at this place with wrong papers as well. And so that showed that people who show courage, who were doing something, that they had a chance to be successful by doing that, because it was possible. And because of that moment, and that there was this woman being hidden in that dangerous place full of Nazis, that gave us the idea, come on, there must be a lot of other stories in Berlin. And then we made that step to that historical place, these three women sitting there, and just, they are like detectives of the historian stories, yeah, of how Jewish people could survive in Berlin. And they were following of these 1,700 about survivors, all their stations. It's unbelievable. They are doing that more than 300 days a year, since 10 years now. They are paid by the Berlin mayor, and they just sit there and they know everything. And so they helped us. We asked them, we need 4 persons, maybe 5, 6, so that we can start to talk to them and find out who's able to tell their stories in a way that we can make a documentary, and then later on we said that we can make a docudrama, a feature mixed with a documentary. And so that's how it started, personally.
Other questions? Right there?
There was sort of a hybrid man, a Nazi, sitting there around the table with all his fellow Nazis drinking wine.
Yeah.
But he hid these 2 young Jewish women, Ellen and Ruth, I guess.
Yeah.
And he knew they were Jewish.
Yeah.
Did he ever get to be a righteous Gentile, or was his Nazi associations and the fact that he was so embedded in the Nazism, did that preclude him from also being on the wall at Yad Vashem, the wall of the righteous?
Yeah. No, he was a very ambivalent character. But I asked Mrs. Gumpel, what happened with Oberst Wehen, that officer Wehen, who was selling the stuff the German Nazis robbed in France, and he was selling it on the black market to his fellows who wanted to have a good life during those last 2 years, or because they knew that it's lost anyway. So, and he knew they were Jewish, but it was impossible to get proper German people, let's say, to work in this position, because he was illegal by himself. The thing what he was doing was something, if they would have caught him, they would have had to punish him by sentence to death. So that's the things, how they go if there is a dictator organized country, so things. But Mrs. Gumpel told me that they never heard anything about him after the war. They did not know what happened with him. Maybe he died, nobody knows, so yeah.
There's a story there. Over there?
The footage is original footage, of course. We used it to show the reality, to mix it up. And yeah, the second part of the question, Stella. Stella was one of those about 20 persons, Jewish Berliners, who were forced by the Gestapo to help them. They were these 20 persons, and Stella was one of them. Stella was living in the underground first, and then she was caught. They found her there. And then they said to her, come on, if you help us, you have a chance. You have a chance to stay in Berlin, and your parents, maybe we just bring them to Theresienstadt. and we don't bring them to Auschwitz. So she was forced, and then they were beating her up as well. And they made a lot of pressure with her. They told her that they will destroy her beautiness. She was 21, and that's what we got told by Chioma, who know her. This story is, he told us, she must have been a very beautiful, fascinating, blonde young woman. Her parents wanted her to be a singer. Her father was a vaudeville orchestra director before all that evil things started in Berlin. And so all these plans were destroyed by the Nazi takeover of Germany. And then, yeah, she was forced. They made a lot of pressure about her, and then she started to be, to go around with another guy, like we showed it in the movie, and they were walking around. And as she had been a person living in the underground before by herself, she knew what was important and where other young people were trying to hide themselves. And it was mostly young people who were in the underground. And so she was walking around at those places like Kurfürstendamm, let's say here the Broadway, and 42nd Street in Berlin or whatever. She knew where those places were, where there were some cafes and there were some theaters, because the young Jewish people, they liked to go to cinemas as well, because it was for 2 hours. You could sit in the darkness, it was warm, and you could relax for 2 hours. Yeah? And you have to do something that you can think about something self as well. So it was a very curious, strange psychological situation. And Stella knew how these people in underground.
Did she survive the war?
Yeah, she survived. But they caught her. No, she was precise. She was so stupid. In summer 45, she was trying to hide herself 30 kilometers outside from Berlin. But then she heard that people from the Jewish community who had survived, and people who were tortured by the Nazis, that they get extra portions for what they can eat. So she was so stupid that she went back to Berlin and said, "Hello, I was treated very bad by the Nazis, and I'm Jewish." And then in that moment, it was in July 45, there were some of the people who came back from Auschwitz, and there were some of them who recognized her. And so they directly tried to, they were taking her blonde hairs, they were torturing her from, we call it in Germany Lynchen, I don't know the English word for it. They tried to kill her, and there were some Russian police people, and they stopped her being killed. And the Russian soldiers, they made a jail thing with her, and so they put her for 10 years to jail, and they brought her to Buchenwald, which before then was one of those concentration camps in Germany mostly for communists and other political people. But so she was sitting there for 10 years. And then they let her out in 1955, and then she came back to Berlin, to West Berlin, and then she wanted to have her daughter back, her little daughter back, because in 1945, before the war came to its end, she got a daughter. She was pregnant in the last year in underground. It's a tragedy, and it's a horrible story. It's a story full of drama. And, yeah.
We have time for one more question.
This was an absolutely amazing movie. I need to see it again to be able to absorb more of it, and I thank you for doing it. I'm wondering, when did people in Germany start being able to talk? One of the results of being survivors, one of the modes of survival is to never talk about it, so that children never heard the story until if they ever got to hear it from their parents at all. That didn't happen in every family and not for every survivor. But I'm wondering, like, the children of
Mrs. Gumpel?
the Invisibles here.
Yeah.
I don't know if they want to say it. I don't mean to put them on the spot. But when did this begin to happen? Like, we have the stories, the oral histories here in the States.
So the
When
question,
did that begin in Germany? And also, has there been anything been done about people who weren't necessarily in Berlin? I had a social work professor at Hunter School of Social Work, Maria
I'm going to cut you
Rosenberg.
off just because we only have 2 more
Right,
minutes, and
and
if
so
everyone
she
answer.
disguised and she survived because she looked very not Jewish, basically.
So the question is, when did people really start to talk about it again?
We heard from the people who survived, and with the people we made interviews with, Mrs. Levy and Mrs. Gumpel and Joerg Widmer, we heard that many of them started to talk about that when they were in the 80s and in the 90s. That was 40 years behind the end of the Second World War. Some of them were starting to tell their stories in the families, but to tell their stories to other people so it becomes a theme in society, that started in the middle of the 80s, in the 90s. Up till then, and even though later, the survivors had a bit of a bad feeling as well, because they could survive, although it was very difficult to be successful in doing that. But they did not have to go to these evil horror places, to the concentration camps, to Auschwitz. Yeah. Because of that, that's what they told us, they had a bit of a feeling that they did not
Survivor guilt.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for such a compelling and devastating.
Thank you.